Hello and welcome back to a new episode of Native Tongues, where we speak with writers and musicians about where they call home and how that place influenced their voice. I'm your host, Aaron Palmer, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Ken Hall. Before we get into it, if you want to be a champion of this podcast, hit that follow button and take a second to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Now, let's get into the fun part. This week, we're taking a slight variation from our normal routine, where we typically dive into someone's background to learn more about them and what influenced their creative voice. This week, we're sticking to a particular topic, and that's because our guest is a journalist who has been reporting on Scientology since 1995. He first worked at a number of alt-weekly newspapers around the country, most recently as editor of The Village Voice in New York. During this time, among other stories that he wrote, Scientology kept popping up over and over again. And he followed this lead, and he became the prominent journalist in reporting on and exposing the so-called church. He also authored the books The Unbreakable Miss Lovely, How the Church of Scientology Tried to Destroy Paulette Cooper, and Battlefield Scientology, Exposing L. Ron Hubbard's Dangerous Religion. You may have seen him recently in the HBO documentary Going Clear. And a quick warning before we get into it. A lot of what you will hear is going to sound made up and at times conspiratorial. But believe me, every word of it is true. So, on that note, let's get into it. Let's welcome to the pod, Tony Ortega.
Really good people.
We thought so. We've been pretty lucky so far with our guests.
Yeah. Well, why are you slumming with me then?
Yeah, I would ask you the same. I was like, my first question is, the guy clearly has questionable, decision making skills because he said yes to us. So.
Yeah. So, where are you? Are you in New York?
Yeah, I'm in the suburbs north of the city.
Okay. You from there?
No, I'm from LA.
Oh, I'm kidding. How'd you end up out here? Well, I say out here. We're in Baltimore, so I just meant East Coast.
Well, it's a long story. You want to hear the story?
That's what we're here for.
Right.
We got time. Dive in.
Well, yeah, I'm from LA, from the most beautiful part of Los Angeles, the city of Compton.
Really?
Are you really?
It was kind of rough even then when I was growing up. But, I ended up, my mom moved us to Orange County, and I moved around. And I kind of wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know how to do it. We were very poor. But in college, I kind of plugged away at various, writerly kind of courses and stuff and started teaching. But I still really didn't know the first thing about, of course, I was interested in newspapers, but then I met a couple of newspaper reporters and they seemed like such miserable people.
Grizzled, angry people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. Where were you teaching?
The story is I was teaching. I'd gotten a couple of degrees at Cal State Fullerton. I was teaching there. I went up to UC Santa Cruz, did some more work up there and did some teaching there. Met somebody who I moved to Phoenix to be with her. She had gotten a job there. And that's when I discovered the Phoenix New Times. I guess I had been living in parts of LA and the Bay Area that I just had never seen an alt weekly that was so hard hitting. I had seen some sort of like guides to what to do on the weekend, but
right.
This thing was everything that I wished I could be doing, long features, serious investigative pieces that, I was just stunned that something like that could even exist. And so I just took a wild chance and wrote the editor an email and described myself. And he said, you got anything for an overeducated, underemployed 30-something that wants a better job?
Right.
And he said, I got to meet you, man. And so I came down to the office and we just hit it off. And so I kind of started over from college instructor to reporter at that point and wrote a few things that they liked, had a lot of fun, but they were a little bit, light.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll never forget, the editor took me to lunch one day and said, okay, if you want a permanent job, because I've been in kind of a temporary thing.
Yeah.
You got to put some red meat on the table.
You got to get your hands dirty.
Yeah.
And I'm like, whoa, what does that mean? And so that's when I just, part of our mandate at a newspaper like that, it's called Phoenix New Times. It's an alt weekly paper, and it was much different back then. Our mandate was to look for stories that the Daily had either missed or done badly.
And the Daily was the prominent newspaper in the area?
Arizona Republic there. Yeah. Whatever city you're in, you're looking for stories because the Daily's moving too fast, or they're kind of, they don't have the space to dig into something.
Sure.
But so I got used to reading the letters to the editor to kind of see if there was some hints in there. And sure enough, one day in the Arizona Republic, there was a letter from a guy named Rick Ross, they had written a story about how he had lost a $5 million judgment in a lawsuit. And in his letter, he said, yeah, you wrote that I lost my lawsuit. You failed to mention that it was the Church of Scientology that recruited the plaintiff against me. And I thought, that sounds kind of juicy.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Being from LA, I'd always kind of heard about Scientology. You can't grow up there without at least hearing something about it. And so I contacted him, found out it was a fantastic story. He's this nationally known cult deprogrammer. And Scientology.
Was he at the time?
Yes, he was at the time. He was less famous then. I think my story was the first full profile of him. He actually specialized in Bible-based cults. And so parents who had lost their teenage kids to a cult would go to him and work with him to see if he could talk their kid out.
Gotcha.
And he rarely had anything to do with Scientology, but Scientology hated the very idea and had private investigators on him and all kinds of things. And so I just thought it was fantastic. I got to write it. It was my first cover story for that publication. It was the story that secured my full-time job. Nice. And I just started this long interest I've had in Scientology. That story led to more. I was fortunate that publication allowed me to kind of specialize in things. I mean, I wrote about a lot of other things. I wrote business stories, education stories, science stories. But every year or two, I'd come back to something really interesting about Scientology, because at that time in the mid-90s, there was still the chilling effect from the Time magazine lawsuit. Scientology had sued Time for $400 million, and Scientology lost, but Time spent several $1 million defending themselves. And so publications were very skittish about writing about Scientology. Even today, some of them are.
Yeah, sure.
So what were the lawsuits based on? The Time one and the Rick Ross one?
Okay, so in May 1991, Richard Bahar, writing for Time magazine, had a cover story that called Scientology the Global Cult of Greed, and just sort of summarized all the things about it. And it was the first time a major publication had really taken on Scientology's history and their controversies.
They had to know there was going to be some backlash, right?
Oh, Richard Bahar himself was just put through hell, and they got sued for $400 million, but the story was true, and so the claims were kicked out. So one of the groups that was, I think, tangentially involved in that, and it was a real thorn to Scientology, there was this group called the Cult Awareness Network, and it was basically a nonprofit that some parents had put together so that there could be a place. This is before the internet, of course,
right,
where you could call and get some information. What is this Scientology thing? And Scientology hated that. And so they were always looking for ways to harm the Cult Awareness Network. Well, when Rick Ross had worked with a mother to get her 18-year-old son out of a Bible-based Seattle area cult, it was on a reference from the Cult Awareness. She had called the Cult Awareness Network. The Cult Awareness Network had hooked her up with Rick. Rick had then lured this 18-year-old into a hotel room and had locked the door. And see, that was the key, is that's technically kidnapping, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Right.
So the kid ended up, instead of coming out of the church, suing Rick Ross, and Rick lost. It was like a $5 million judgment. And a certain amount of that was borne by the Cult Awareness Network, and it bankrupted CAN. And then all of its assets, including its confidential cult files that they had been dealing with parents for 20 years, were sold at auction. And guess who bought it?
I was just about to say, I know exactly where that's going.
Church of Scientology bought all that material. And so after that date in like 1996 or something, whenever you called the Cult Awareness Network, you probably didn't know you were calling the Church of Scientology.
God, that's like,
oh my God.
I hear the thing about like, we're like inundated with the people that are like, do you owe back taxes? But they're like, don't actually, that's actually just the IRS. They just have it masked or whatever in a different way. And if the IRS is listening, please, I do not owe back taxes. Everything's fine. But the same idea, like, so they probably promote that, keep it going, cult awareness. They're like, yes, cults are terrible. We're not a cult, but
I don't think it's doing anything today, but for a while there, they
that
were
would be
using
really
it.
shady.
Yeah.
It's weird to me that they would be the aggressor in that, where they are saying, we don't have really anything to do with that kid, but we're going to argue on his behalf because we know eventually we're going to be in the crosshairs, right? And probably were obviously at the time getting some heat on that. But that's interesting. It's so calculated.
So I'm going to have a lot of stupid questions. So
That's okay.
That are kind of naive.
Let me just bring you up to current time real quick. So
go ahead. I'll go back to it.
So my first story about Scientology was also my first cover story for the Phoenix New Times in 1995.
Mm-hmm.
Over the years, every once in a while, I would come back to Scientology. And then a few years later, they started moving me around. They sent me to Los Angeles to be a reporter. They had a paper in LA called New Times Los Angeles. I did more Scientology stories there. They closed that paper. They moved me back to Arizona. They put me on the editor track. I became the managing editor of their paper in Kansas City called The Pitch, which was wonderful. And then the editor-in-chief of their paper in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Now, in those two locations, there wasn't any Scientology to write about, so I didn't write about Scientology for several years. Then, while I was in Fort Lauderdale, they bought the Village Voice in New York City. And they put somebody in, didn't work out, so they came to me and said, would you like to come on The Voice? I said, okay. So in March 2007, I became the editor-in-chief of the Village Voice. And anyway, that's how I got to New York. And I had actually also I did a year and a half at Columbia University in the early 80s.
I think I saw you went to Columbia, and I did 3 semesters. It said, and
I just did 3 semesters. Yeah,
I'm like I could see. So if you do a year and and you had come from California, and I'm like, okay, I get that. That makes sense. You do a year, but you went back for another semester, and then we're like,
enough.
Oh, we don't want to get into all that. It was about money.
Anyway, yeah.
Anyway,
interesting though.
So when I got to The Voice in 2007, this is a legendary weekly newspaper that had a very good website, but I needed to help change people's mentality that we were a digital daily news enterprise that happened to put out a weekly. See, I needed to kind of change the mentality. And so people that were used to just writing for the paper once a week, I've got to get them used to the idea of writing something for the website every day.
Right.
And I was the kind of manager that I want to, I'll lead by example. So I looked for something that I could put on the website every day. And the first thing I did was the archives. I mean, I had so much fun going into there was this room there that had nothing but archives going back to 1955 when the paper was founded. Wow. And I just spent hours going through those. And then I realized they weren't online. So that was my first thing, was every day I would choose an issue from 56, 57, 58, whatever, and pick out one really cool thing and put it online. So I found the very first time a young musician named Bobby Dylan was mentioned in the Village Voice. I found the first time this young comic named Walter, aka Woody Allen, was named in the paper. I was having fun. I was finding really cool things, but the problem was nobody was reading it. I mean, I was very disappointing to me. People weren't that into it. But then anytime I'd put a little Scientology thing out on the website, because I still had my sources and everything, boom, it would just go nuts. After a couple of years, I realized, okay, the archive thing is not working. People want to read about Scientology. So in 2011, I started writing about Scientology every day at the Village Voice website. And I've been doing it ever since. So I kind of gave myself the job of daily news reporter with the beat of Scientology around the world. So, every day somewhere in the world there's something like, so today I wrote about something going on in Adelaide, South Australia. I mean, it's just, there's always something going on.
Yeah. And at this point, after decades of working on this, I assume you have a reliable network, because this is all pretty tight-lipped information, right?
There's a lot of people who have left, and a lot of them are very vocal, but many more are not. They want to remain private. And so they'll,
why?
Yeah, exactly. So they send me stuff that they would like to see out, but that they can't put out themselves.
Right.
So I talked to a lot of people.
Was there a turn after like the whole like Netflix documentary, or was it Going Clear? What's that
was HBO.
It's HBO, sorry. You were attached to it, Did you see a change in their tactics or the?
I think it was part of a change in the media. Definitely, in the 90s, there was that chilling effect from the Time magazine story. So there was very little coverage at all.
Sure.
The Washington Post did some stuff. But also, there was a lot of just, making fun of the Xenu stuff. And then I think in the 2000s, things gradually started to change as some really interesting people came out and started telling their stories. I think the press coverage started to get a little more sophisticated and a little more rich. And so by the time Alex Gibney comes along, Lawrence Wright writes his piece for New Yorker that then turns into his book Going Clear. And then Alex Gibney teams up with him to make the film. Now we're getting a deep, sensitive portrayal of what Scientologists actually go through, what it's like to leave, the sort of retaliation they face. It's just so much more sophisticated. And I was very, very fortunate. They asked me to be in that film and talk. They let me introduce the whole Tom Cruise idea and stuff like that. But that I have definitely watched that change over time. And I like to think that I was part of it, that I've helped educate people a little bit more. And I credit people like Jason Begay. I remember Jason Begay sat me down one day and said, listen, you need to focus on some different things and really talk to me about that it's about the journey that these Scientologists go through more than crazy things L. Ron Hubbard said. Well, I still do both, but I am more sensitive to what these people have been through, I think.
Right.
Okay. So can I jump back a second? First, I have some questions about the lawsuits. So if they sued Time for $400 million for defamation, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Have they ever come after you for publishing daily, or can they?
They try to make my life very difficult, but they've never sued me. They've never even filed a lawyer letter against me.
Like a cease and desist, nothing?
Nothing. They do scummy things instead. They've sent a private investigator twice to intimidate my mother in California. They've sent other private investigators to people in Kansas City to talk to them, other countries. The scummiest thing they did was they hired an out-of-work daily news reporter to pretend that he was working on a story that my wife was a terrorist, and he was trying to get quotes from her employers.
Quotes from her employers? I don't even understand that angle.
What's the basis of that?
Do you remember what the anonymous movement was in 2008 and 2009? And besides the people, protesting, there was a lot of online stuff, a lot of forums, people trading information about Scientology, joking about it, having a great time. My wife, before I met her, was just one of the thousands and thousands of people that took part in those forums telling jokes about Scientology. Well, Scientology considers Anonymous to be a terrorist organization. Therefore, my wife is a terrorist because she took part in the forums. It was just a way to try to freak out her bosses to get her fired, because that's what they do. They go after the family members. They try to get people kicked out of their jobs. So they've run that operation 2 different times. And then they've done some other elaborate things. But yeah, they've never sued me. They've never. And the thing is, I'm always asking them for comment. They never respond. If they called me and said, Tony, we didn't like the story, we'd like you to include this sentence of our, I would love to put that in.
Sure.
But they just instead they sneak around and try to freak out people I know.
Yeah, it's such a weird way to put like social pressure on somebody. And again, in such a calculated, bizarre way.
It is, and it works. And they do it because it works. I know a number of people that have gone completely silent because they went through that. And they just, that psychological dread that you feel, that's what they're after. They want to produce that in you and then you go away.
Right.
And it works.
But what's the ultimate outcome? If they are threatening your mother or, anyone's family member, what's their end game there? If you just ignored them,
shut them up, just
right. They call it handling. They call it a handling. Yeah. And there's specifically, there's a woman named Linda Hamill who works for David Miscavige, the church leader, and she's in charge of all the covert and dirty trick stuff. And I have no doubt she's got dossiers on me and Leah Remini and Mike Rinder and everybody. And,
what's her official title?
Ooh, that's a good question. Right now, I think she's OSA Invest. If there is, I don't know exact title, but she's in the Office of Special Affairs, which is basically their secret police.
Anybody who's like Office of Special anything, you're like, get out of here. We know what you're doing. We know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I mean, what they do is they call it a handling. Why haven't you handled Ortega? And the idea is if they find something that finally makes me go away, and all it does is make confirm to me that they are the bullies that the ex-members say they are. So I don't know. That's what makes me interested in writing about.
Is there ever threat of violence? Like, I mean, I guess that's what I'm getting at. If you were to just not pay attention to them, to what extent are they willing to go to, I guess?
They spend so much money, Aaron. They just waste so much money flying people around the country, around the world, on these silly operations. But they really don't. I haven't seen much evidence that they do anything physically violent. I know there's some rumors about some things, but I've never put too much stock into them. L. Ron Hubbard Jr. once said that what his father wanted was not to kill you. His father wants to see you lying in a gutter somewhere after you've lost your job and your house and your family, and you've drunk yourself into a stupor, and he can stand over you and laugh.
Sounds like a fun guy.
That's what L. Ron Hubbard wanted. That's what he meant by destroying enemies utterly. So that's what they do. They try to get people fired from their jobs. They try to, mess with their finances, and then they hire professionals to do it.
Right.
But as far as physical violence, like I said, any evidence of that is pretty thin.
Are they just sitting on an outrageous amount of cash?
Oh, incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. You remember about a year and a half ago, that story broke that the Mormon church had this secret $100 billion
$4 billion
fund.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounded so amazing, $100 billion. But the Mormons legitimately have 30 million people.
Right.
So the fact that Scientology has 4 or 5 billion may not sound like it's as much, but they've only got 20,000 people. Scientology is the richest church per capita in the world.
They only have 20,000 people?
Yeah.
And it's tax exempt, right? So it's like they're not paying taxes on any of that stuff.
Right. That leads to my next kind of minutia question before I get into like the broader stuff. Is you mentioned that what was the guy's name? Rick Ross.
Rick Ross, yeah.
So, they are paying for that auction afterwards. I mean, that has to be public, right? There's records of them buying that. How can they take tax exempt donations, church dollars, whatever it is, to publicly buy something that has nothing to do with their church?
Because they had an attorney buy it.
There you go. And then he donates his estate to somebody,
right,
it all
right.
goes around that way.
His name was Stephen Hayes, and he claimed he was buying it for a group of concerned citizens that are concerned about how churches are being treated or something like that.
Oh, good God. And he wants to really protect that data and make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Thank you.
Doing the God's work.
The Mormons thing is funny, like to me, because so we grew up here on the East Coast, and so I don't know anybody who is a Scientologist that I know of. Mm-hmm. To me, it's sort of just like this weird culty thing. But we have the Mormon church right in DC, right? So you drive around the DC Beltway and it looks like faux Disneyland, which is, it really is.
Didn't you go in there last year?
But yeah, so they opened it up. They were the story, at least that I understand, is that they were doing construction, so they had to basically unconsecrate the whatever doors, and so they were like, "Well, we got all these other people coming in. We'll allow the public in." And so it was, free. You could go, and you got a very, it's this ginormous castle. But we got to see like one stairwell and like one little section of a floor and like a room and this thing, And it was really weird. I was like totally expecting, based on what the money aspect of it, I just was expecting this like super like ornate, gaudy, rich sort of thing. It was the weirdest thing. We went in and it was like the most bland funeral home you've ever been in. Like everything is like neutral colors. There's no windows. There's 0 windows in the entire place. So everything has this weird uplighting from above to make it feel sort of like sunlight. But everywhere you go, it's such quiet, and like they're, all the walls are basically white or tan or gray. And there's like some paintings here and some paintings there, but no like big, aha, oh my gosh, look at this splendor of whatever. And there are pictures, if you go on the website, of things we did not see, like some sort of big auditorium-y looking thing like that. But I'm like, where is the money going? And what do you sit like? I just, as I'm walking around there, I feel like this is like the setup for a movie or something. And like somewhere hidden in this thing, it's going to be like a Dan Brown novel. And they're going to go through and there's going to be a secret chamber that they go down and they find the gold. You know what I mean? Like it totally gives you that vibe because it's so innocuous on the outside. And I will say, every single person we talked to, they're super nice. I was expecting to get a little bit more of like, you could stop by here. I have a pamphlet for you, something like that, but there was none of that at all. They were just like, thank you for coming. Check out the place. This is where they do this, and that was that. I expected it to be far weirder because we actually had friends who they had friends get married and they were in the wedding. And their wedding party, because they were not Mormon, waited outside.
Oh my God.
Outside in the parking lot for them to go in, do their thing, and then come out. And then they went and did their stuff. So
that's so bizarre.
Well, Baltimore, I don't think Baltimore is much of a Scientology city at all.
No,
but like I know of. I don't know anybody, or I don't drive by any billboards for it yet.
That's a city I never hear about.
I'm going to keep you on speed dial and be like, let me know. How are we doing? What's our Scientology index today?
Hubbard wrote Dianetics when he was in New Jersey, and incorporated a couple of years later, incorporated the first Church of Scientology in Camden, New Jersey. But then the first physical church was started in Los Angeles in 1954. But then they created in 1955 something they called the Founding Church in DC. And there are Scientologists to this day that will tell you, the very first church was in Washington, DC. No, it wasn't, but it was an important early church. And it was basically Hubbard's headquarters from about 55 to 59. And then the stuff with the government was getting too hot because they made a lot of health claims.
Oh,
he claimed that Dianetics Scientology could heal anything. And so that's when he absconded to England. And he was in England from 59 to 66.
Right.
And then in 67, things were getting ugly for him there. So that's when he took to sea and ran Scientology from a ship.
Right. Yeah.
Is that what the Sea Org is all about?
From 67 to 75. And that's why he created the Sea Org.
Yeah.
Which to this day, they still use these naval ranks and stuff, even though they're on land.
Oh, they're on land?
Yeah.
I thought they operated in open waters.
They have a ship. They have a cruise ship in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
But the Sea Org's big compounds, bases are in Los Angeles, east of Los Angeles, in the Hemet area, and in Clearwater, Florida. They're not, it still has this naval sort of organization,
right?
But it's, there's only one ship and only some people are on it. Most people are on land.
Gotcha. And is that the one where you have to sign like a 99-year work release or something? And
billion year contract.
Oh, across the board, it's all the billion year. Anyone who's there?
If you want to join the Sea Org, you have to sign a billion-year contract. I'm not kidding. You really do, and they believe it. And you promised. See, the basic idea of Scientology is that you're actually the 76 trillion-year-old being called a Thetan, and that this is just the current thing you're walking around in this lifetime.
Yeah. So in the grand scheme of things, a billion years isn't that bad.
Right? Exactly. So exactly. So a billion years, no big deal. So you sign that and you promise to come back lifetime after lifetime.
Okay.
I was trying to figure out what I'm getting out of it. Here's the contract. This is up for negotiation. Could I give you 500,000 years? Could we do 500,000 years and maybe I'll eat less donuts on the bridge?
That's works. A temporary, what is that? The
what's that?
A temporary employee.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 1099.
It's 1099. Thank you.
Right. Where do I fill that out? So what's the attraction? First of all, just on a really super basic, stupid level, like what is the attraction?
That's where I was going with this next.
I think Scientology, like a lot of other groups, sells certainty, and for a lot of people, that's very attractive to them because life is very uncertain. It's you may be having trouble with your job or relationships, and nothing seems to work. And when you ask people, "What do I do here?" they give you bad advice. It's just life is so confusing. And Scientology comes and says, "Yeah, but we have the manual. We have check sheets,
the cheat code.
We have all the answers."
Yeah.
And 95% of people are not attracted to that. They can smell a scam from a mile away, right? I mean, anybody tells you that they've got all the answers, they're bullshitting you. But a small percentage of people find that really reassuring. Like, oh, you have the answers? Oh, here, take my money.
Right. I'm so desperate.
And so you talk to people and they're intelligent people, and they're, later in life after they've left, and you ask them, and they will invariably come up with some vulnerability. They had just gone through a bad breakup, or they were failing at their job, or they were very confused about, their relationship with their parents. And here's this group saying, hey, you'll thrive here. We've got all the answers. You'll do great. And then they take care of everything. They've got all they make you so busy, you don't have time to think. So I think that's the basic attraction. And also they sell it as kind of like a self-help thing. And it's got this kind of professional gloss. Like you were talking about the Mormon church, it surprised you that it was kind of bland. Sometimes for people who don't know much about Scientology will think, well, it's in California and Florida. It's probably kind of hippie. It's probably kind of like a sex cult. No, it's a business cult. They're obsessed with business administration. It's the strangest thing. And so when you first get into it, it just looks like, it's like being in a big corporation, and they're helping you with your communication. And, it's got that professional gloss.
It's like a multi-level marketing scheme, essentially, right?
Well, except there's no pressure on you to bring in other people. I mean, they'd like it if you did, but it's not like that kind of thing. The other thing that I think is very attractive is how much the focus is on you. Like if you go to a church or a synagogue or a mosque, what are you doing? You're sitting down in a group experience.
Yeah, it's all about community.
And there's a person who's telling you about lore that's a couple thousand years old that everyone shares their admiration for these stories. You have this shared sort of experience. Scientology is nothing like that whatsoever. It's you and one other person. And what are they? They're not telling you anything about what to believe or what, here's the stories we believe. They're asking you about you. Tell me about your childhood. Tell me about the things you went through. It's you all the time. It never changes.
There's a narcissistic side of that too.
See, this is, people always ask me, why are there some celebrities? See, first of all, I also want to say there's not that many celebrities. There's a misconception that half of Hollywood's in it. No, there's a few. But here might be the attraction is that it's all about you and talking about yourself. And the other thing that they get into fairly early on is that by questioning you about things, they are helping you figure out that there's more to you than you realize.
So it's like therapy.
And that's a really attractive sort of, oh, really? Yeah, you may have lived before this time. Do you have any memories? And then a few years in, you're remembering planets you ran millions of years ago in another part of the galaxy.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so you're not just like this clerk in some company. You used to run a planet. I think that's the attraction, is that it makes people feel like they're part of this grand galactic narrative. And again, it's all based on you. It's all questioning you all the time. You never sit they have a chapel service on Sunday. It's purely a PR thing because they kept getting asked questions about that. And so they put on this bogus Sunday service just merely to kind of calm down Christians that don't like the fact that it's a church and has kind of a cross on it.
And probably the IRS.
Because really Scientology, is not a group experience. It's you and your auditor. And at first it's not too expensive, but you get to the upper levels and the kind of crazy things they're getting out of you, then you're paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars an hour. And it will go on for weeks.
To advance.
Yeah.
Well, so on that, as you were talking about like sort of megalomania idea there, I saw the synopsis of your book about Paulette Cooper. And like her experience of like her whatever friend or ex-boyfriend or whatever that stopped by was like, I think I'm Jesus. And, and then proceeds to, attempt to rape her or whatever, because he's a son of God. And then she calls a friend who has experience with it. And she's like, he said he was Jesus. And the guy's like, well, he might have been. He might have been. Might have been Jesus.
And that's when she realized, I got to check this out.
Jesus. That is deep stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, some of these ex-Scientologists will tell me that in auditing, you'd run into multiple people that all believe they were Jesus in a previous life. But see, Hubbard was smart. He imposed this rule. You are never supposed to talk to another Scientologist about what goes on in your auditing sessions. See,
Oh
that way
God.
they can't compare notes and realize they all think they were Jesus.
Right.
Right.
And it's such a construct too at that point, because now you're really they're just filling you back up with something you were already familiar with, right? So it's
Right.
not like if you told me I was zebraplex and I ran some crazy planet and I'm like, oh wow, I can't even conceive of what that is. You know why? Because I'm a billion-year-old being. But if you're like, you were Jesus, I'm like, really? Like another Jesus? Like the Jesus we had here? I was that Jesus? It's like that doesn't make
Right.
sense. That to me is so grounded in our reality that I'm like, okay, now I know you're shitting me.
And another very smart rule, the auditor, the person questioning you, can't evaluate what you're saying. So they can't, when you say, I think I was Jesus, they can't say, oh, come on. They just have to say, okay, thank you. What else do you
Right.
remember? Right. So they can never invalidate what you're saying. And that's another very smart rule Hubbard put in.
Yeah, I'm so skeptical of any of these organizations. I think Mormon Temple or Mormon Church is like a great example of this, that can solve everything from the inside. How they are marriage counselors, how they can help your addictions. And it's all people with no professional experience or, no degrees in any of this stuff, but they've risen through the ranks and they've learned what they're supposed to say in it. And that somehow, because they're on a higher level, whatever that subjective level is within the church, that makes them a prominent figure that can work with you. I guess. And it just seems like there's a lot of that in Scientology.
Well, and then the added wrinkle in Scientology is that, yes, it's important if that person who's doing your counseling is a high enough level, but they're not the source of what's going on. Everything has to come from Hubbard. They literally call him source. So the authority you're talking about as far as a college degree or none of that matters. All that matters in Scientology is that this person who is helping you through your marriage counseling or is auditing you, that they are just by rote delivering lines that L. Ron Hubbard wrote. It's all goes back to Hubbard.
So, in, I don't know, like the Catholic or Christian churches, there are still Bible studies. There are people who are looking to uncover more information or to understand it better. And there is progress within them, be it slow progress. It's like trying to turn a tanker around, it doesn't happen quickly. Is there any of that in Scientology, or is it just finite? Here are the rules. Nothing will ever change.
There are no theologians in Scientology. Again,
Yeah.
It all comes from Hubbard. And it's supposed to be set in stone. Scientology is a fundamentalist organization.
Mm-hmm.
They are always trying to figure out what exactly did Ron say in 1951? What did he say in 1963? There is a slight evolution, though. Even Hubbard himself changed things over time, but everything was supposed to be basically set by the 70s when he supposedly stepped back. And then now under David Miscavige, he's not supposed to be changing anything, but he has made some changes. In fact, this is the level. It's so silly. That little machine there over my shoulder there, that's called an e-meter. That's an early version. They have a different looking one now. It just measures skin galvanism. Okay. And there's a needle there on the dial. And so you're holding these sensors as they're asking you these questions, and the auditor's watching that needle. They were looking for something called a floating needle. They felt that if the needle kind of went sway back and forth, it indicated that you had solved whatever issue you were dealing with at that time. And it was called a floating needle. It was that's what everyone was seeking. And I'm not an expert in this, but my understanding is at some point after Hubbard had died and Dave Miscavige had taken over, he changed it from 2 sweeps of the needle to 3.
Right.
And that made it so much harder for people to achieve.
Okay.
It literally led to one of the major exoduses from Scientology.
Really?
Is that people were so angry that David Miscavige would dare to change something that L. Ron Hubbard had set up. So now, of course, after they've been out a while and you talk to them, they're like, okay, now I realize the whole thing was just a parlor trick. It was all nonsense. But at the time, that was crucial to me, that David Miscavige was tinkering with L. Ron Hubbard's ideas. And that has caused, that's why I'm saying it's only about 20,000 now. I think at its height, it had about 100,000 people in 1990.
Oh, wow.
But it's been losing people. And that's one of the reasons, is that some people have left. They're unhappy that David Miscavige has changed some of the things that L. Ron Hubbard had in place. That's how fundamentalist they are.
How was David Miscavige appointed? And is he a lifelong appointee or a billion years?
Right. So when Hubbard took to sea in 1967 and then ran Scientology from a ship for the next 8 years, he had a crew of young people that became the Sea Org, but he also had a little group of, I don't know how many, 5 or 6 young girls that were his messengers.
Sure.
And so people were terrified of them because when he wanted something done, he'd call in his messenger, bark an order at them. That messenger would then run across the ship to whoever the message was for. And then this 12-year-old girl would then try to deliver it with the exact same voice and thrust of whatever Hubbard said, right? And so you were terrified of this 12-year-old girl because it's actually Hubbard coming to scream at you, right?
Right.
A famous, it's amazing. So that particular little core of what's called the Commodore's Messenger Organization became one of the most in the Sea. Even there was so much hierarchy in Scientology, and of course the Sea Org people that signed billion-year contracts are so much more hardcore and inner circle. But even within the Sea Org, there were little groups like the CMO that were so high up. So after they left the sea and went back to land, the CMO had some young girls and boys, including a young David Miscavige. He was also a Commodore's messenger. When they got out to the desert in California in 1978, and Hubbard was making films, it's a great story. In 77, the FBI raided Scientology, and Hubbard went into hiding. And while he was in hiding, Star Wars became a phenomenon in the theaters, right?
Okay.
And so imagine what it's like. Hubbard was a Pulp Fiction writer in the 30s. Suddenly, space opera, the thing that he wrote, is now the most popular thing in American theaters. It drove him crazy. So he did 2 things.
And he's in exile at that point? He's like,
he was hiding in an apartment in Nevada at that point.
Okay.
So he writes a screenplay, a very bad screenplay of space opera called Revolt in the Stars. Oh. And the other thing was, he's like, let's make the movies ourselves. So he went to they got this base in La Quinta, California. He got a bunch of these young Sea Org members and his Commodores, messengers, and they started making these very, very bad films in the desert. And there's actually a photograph you can see of Hubbard directing the film and little David Miscavige with filming. He became like a cameraman. Okay. So that's how David Miscavige got proximity to Hubbard. He was a Commodore's messenger, and they were making films. Later, when Hubbard went into complete seclusion after 1980, Hubbard was hiding at a ranch in California. Nobody knew where he was, but he was with this couple called Pat and Annie Broker. They wanted Hubbard to keep running Scientology. So what they would do is Pat Broker would arrange with David Miscavige to meet in a parking lot somewhere at 2 a.m. in the San Bernardino area. And then Miscavige would pass all the papers to Broker. Broker would then take them back to Hubbard. So they created that bottleneck. That's what gave them the power, was that Pat Broker and David Miscavige were really running the bottleneck for the entire Scientology organization. So then when Hubbard died in January 86, people will tell you that Hubbard then had anointed Pat Broker to take over. I think the document that said that was probably bogus, but whatever, you can see why it was basically going to come down to either Pat Broker or David Miscavige. Right. These were the 2 guys that were running
nobody
things.
Else. There's nobody else to like.
There were some other people. There were other people that Hubbard liked and trusted. There were some women, for example. But look, Miscavige just muscled them out of the way and became the leader. And there are Scientologists to this day who are angry about that. And I tell them, like, well, one megalomaniac replaced another. What did you expect was going to happen, right?
Right. The audacity.
So so David Miscavige just muscled the others out of the way, mainly Pat Broker, and just took over that position. And
is Pat Broker still in the organization?
No, he left. But Miscavige was always really paranoid that Broker could kind of come sailing back in and like stage some kind of a coup. So he hired 2 cops who had just left the force, I guess, to follow Pat Broker. Their mandate was follow him 24 hours a day, but without him knowing. And for the next 22 years, they were watching Pat Broker. They finally lost their jobs and then sued Scientology and talked for 1 day. And I was the first reporter that got to talk to them.
Shit. Wow.
I got to spend a whole day with them. It was wild. They were telling me all these great stories. I'll send you a link. It's a lot of fun. It's called,
Yeah.
And because Scientology, like when they sent the private investigator to intimidate my mom, when they sent private investigators to, doorstop some other people I know, they want me to hear about it, right? Hubbard
Right.
Hubbard defined that as a noisy investigation. They want you to know that you're being watched.
Yeah.
These two guys, though, they had the opposite mission. Follow Pat Broker and don't let him know. So one of the things they did, for example, Broker had left. He showed no signs of being involved in Scientology anymore, but David Miscavige wanted him watched. He bought a house. I think it was in the San Luis Obispo area. I can't remember for sure. So they rented the house next door, and this was in the late 80s. And so one of them had his dad befriend Pat Broker at a local bar and develop a relationship so that they were able to convincingly have the dad give Pat a Christmas gift, which was one of the first cordless phones. And I don't know if you remember back before cell phones, when we first had our very first cordless phones, it was a base unit and then a handheld thing. Sure. There was a radio signal between the two.
Mm-hmm.
They had rented the house next door so they could listen in on the radio signal of every call he made.
This has to be the most boring 22 years of anyone's life.
Yeah. I mean, it's like cool espionage thing to play that, but what's the guy doing? Like, what was he doing?
He was that's right? The other thing is, like, he's harmless. They said he was harmless. He was teaching English in college somewhere, And
I feel like that's like punishment for the detectives.
Right.
Like, you assholes for taking this money from this terrible organization. You know what? You've 22 years of purgatory. You get to sit and listen to this English teacher do all this stuff.
He'll live his life.
I do appreciate their surreptitious methods, though. That's at least something. So did he never came back, or hasn't?
No. He's
hasn't seen any sort of light of day and was like, hey, maybe I should talk about it.
He's never been interested in talking to anybody about it. I don't think he has any interest. And frankly, I know people keep telling me, Tony, if you could get an interview with him, it would be amazing. I'm like, I'm not sure it would be. I don't even know if, the stuff he knows is so old, and he could just confirm that he was pushed out by David Miscavige, but what else? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sure it would be. I mean, I'd love to talk to him, but I don't think he's interested.
So what's the draw ultimately? Because I'm not a religious person, so, I don't feel that sense of pull, like that need for the sense of community or like the higher power. I understand people do, but for Scientology specifically, because there's an upfront cost for it, there's a pretty high hurdle to get over in terms of rationalization for what it is. You have to, I guess it has to appeal to a certain kind of person.
Well, like I said, I think initially they're selling certainty, and a certain set of people are drawn to that. They like that idea. And then they gamify it, right? Then it's like, okay, we think you've gotten some great gains. You've improved your communication and stuff, but it's great that you're grade 1, but the things on grade 2 are incredible. And you're going to have to get through grade 3 and grade 4 before you can go clear. And then, when you go clear, well, you're just going to have to find out. Right. And then once you go clear, then you go on the OT levels. Oh, you're operating Thetan level 1, OT 1. Wow. Wait till you see what happens at OT 3. And it's just like, people have talked about that. They're just like, I wanted to quit, but I was like, I kind of wanted to see what's on the next level.
I'm so close to the next thing.
They're promising all these incredible results. Like from the beginning, Hubbard was talking about raised IQ, total recall, perfect eyesight. I mean, all these amazing things. Well, now I've been in Scientology 12 years. None of those things has happened. Yeah, but you're not an OT3 yet. Yeah. Right. It's just, there's always the carrot's always just out of reach. And it costs so much money. I mean, to get all the way to OT8, which is the highest current level, you're going to spend $1 million or $2 million over 15 years. And then OT8 is the cruelest prank. Do you want me to tell you a little bit about the OT levels?
Please.
Yeah,
yes,
please.
All of it.
So when Hubbard first started all this in 1950 with his book Dianetics, the goal was called clear. Mm-hmm. But before too long, he moved the goalposts and said, okay, clear's cool, but now I have these operating Thetan levels, because again, you are a Thetan, and the idea is that you've lived all these trillions of years, but you can't remember that anymore. And that's essentially what Scientology is doing in auditing, helping you remember who you were.
Okay.
Why don't you remember who you were? Well, it's not just that, I mean, there's evil forces out there. There's evil psychiatrists out there. There's evil invader forces that are erasing your memory between lives. You've got to fight that by recovering your memories, remembering those millions of years. So then you go clear, and then you go to OT1, OT2. OT2 is wild. I know OT3 gets all the attention, but OT2 is wild. That's when you're really exploring these trillion-year-old booby traps that have been put in your head by previous civilizations that you were a part of. You have to remember all of this, using the e-meter. Then you get,
what's the path that they're trying to take you on in that? Like, is it here? Let's talk about this. Do you remember that? Tell me about the
path. Okay, the path is that they have lists of words.
Okay.
And they will read you words, and they were watching the meter, and so they mentioned the word purple, and the needle goes, beep. What was that? Purple. When I was a kid, I had a purple bike and I fell off and I hurt myself. Okay, that's reading. Okay, earlier similar. Then there's a lot of pressure on you to remember things,
right?
And they've put you in kind of a trance state. One of the first things you do in Scientology is you do these incredible unending staring contests. Basically, they teach you how to put yourself into a state of. It makes you very suggestible.
Right, exactly. Suggesting, like hypnotic.
So then you're under a lot of pressure to come up with some other thing that had to do with purple. I had this memory. I was on a battlefield, and the leader was wearing purple, and then I got killed. Whoa, yeah, that sounds great. So, and it's like, it's so exciting. You're remembering all these adventurous things about you. So it's chains of words, associations, and they want, and so I've talked to people about this as, I remember, I think it was Jefferson Hawkins was saying, I remember I suddenly saw this control panel, and I realized it was like a navigation panel on a spaceship I was operating. He's like, Tony, I know today that this is all bullshit, but at the time it feels so real. So that's what they're trying to get out of you, is you're trying to remember these things. But then OT3 is of course the famous one, because up until this time, for years and years, it's all about you. What do you remember? And then they can never invalidate it. All we're doing is trying to build up a memory of who you were. Finally, in OT3, maybe 10 years after you've been into Scientology, maybe $1 million in, you're finally told something that you should remember that is external to you. And that is this handwritten thing L. Ron Hubbard has written. When you go to OT3, they literally have to unlock a briefcase, and it's all super secret. And they pull out this piece of writing, and it's this really bad science fiction from Hubbard, where he talks about how there was this confederation of 76 planets from 75 million years ago, and there was this galactic leader named Xenu, and he had an overpopulation problem, and he brought all these people in for tax audits on a ruse, and then froze them in a glycol mixture and stuffed them onto these spacecraft that looked like DC-7 airplanes, and then flew them all to this planet Tegiak, which is what Earth was called 75 million years ago.
Of course. Right.
Packed them around some volcanoes, shot them with nuclear weapons, and blew up all these people. Trapped their Thetans, trapped their souls, forced them to watch 36 days of 3D movies, implanting the world's religions in their memories, which are false, that Xenu created, and then left them to fend for themselves on Earth. Now, there were no human beings 36 million years ago on Earth, so they were, going into other creatures, and then eventually, now the point is, today, 75 million years after that genocide, all those angry, confused souls that had been trapped by Xenu are now clustered around you. Now, you have a Thetan, you are a Thetan, and you're walking around in this body, but there's hundreds and thousands of these leftover Thetans. They're called body Thetans, and they're attached to you. They're invisible, but with the e-meter, you can locate them, placate them, make them go away. So that's what you're doing in OT3, OT4, OT5, OT6, and OT7. Years and years of driving away body Thetans at hundreds of dollars an hour.
Right.
Yeah. It's so crazy. And what's the draw is that when you finally get rid of all these contaminating body Thetans, you will be what's called an operating Thetan. You'll be able to leave your body at will with full perception. You'll be able to create things out of matter, out of thin air, just from thinking about it. You'll be this incredible being with incredible powers. He talks about a Thetan, an operating Thetan, being able to crush a planet between thumb and forefinger.
I mean, what kind of planet are we talking about? Like an Earth planet or like a Pluto?
They're selling them this crazy godhood, basically, if you can just get to the end. And that's what's drawing them forward, are these promise of abilities, superpowers, whatever you want to call them.
Oh, God.
I mean, that sounds appealing.
Yeah.
But then it's an OT7 is the toughest one. You do it on your own at home. It takes years and years. Finally, you get to OT8. And this is the cruelest prank of all, is because I think Hubbard was just a real prankster.
It was really an OT9.
You get to OT8 and they tell you, okay, you've learned all these memories about yourself going back millions of years. It turns out those were the memories of your body things.
Oh.
So now
we need to get to the
you know who you weren't. And now you can start over and find out who you were. That's the message you get after $2 million in Scientology.
Oh my God.
And people are so crushed by it. All they can do is like, yeah, you got to get to the OTA. They can't tell anybody.
Yeah.
They can't warn them.
Ought to be OT, fuck you. Jesus. Well, so I was going to ask about the money part of it, though. So there's not even because like you said, they have all this money. You are paying to do this. They are just taking and taking and taking and taking.
Even at the lowest levels, you're paying?
When you first start out, it's not too bad. It's like $50 or $200 for a course. But like I said, once you get into auditing, you have to buy auditing in 12.5-hour intensives, they're called. And it gets incredibly expensive. And not only are you paying a lot of money for the auditing to go through these levels, but you're also being under a lot of pressure just to make straight donations. This is more in today's Scientology than 30 years ago. But today they're under so much pressure to give money so Dave can build more of these ideal orgs, he calls them, these sort of new churches. And also it's a defense, it's a slush fund. It's for their legal fights.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Oh my God.
War chest.
Even as people have left, even as the membership has dwindled, Dave's gotten better and better at getting these huge donations from people. I mean, 10, 20, $30 million from people.
Is that public record?
Yeah, they put out numerous publications. They don't like that I write about them, but they have a magazine in particular called Impact Magazine where they announce, like I said, they gamify things. They gamify the donations. When you first join what's called the IAS, which is their membership organization, the International Association of Scientologists, to become a lifetime member, I think it's something like $7,000 or $8,000 or something. But they really put a lot of pressure. You want to become a patron. That's $50,000. Okay.
Wow. By the way, just to clarify, is that one of our lifetimes, or am I a member for?
That's a very good question. It's a cumulative thing, but I don't. That's a very good question. Why don't they give you credit for multiple lifetimes?
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
And so, if you can get to that, so that's patron. Then there's patron with honors. And then silver meritorious is $500,000. Gold meritorious is $1 million. And they go up and up and up.
It's just a straight donation.
Just straight donations. You're not supposed to. The only thing you get for it is a trophy.
And maybe and then you just keep working on OT 2 or 3 or whatever.
Exactly.
So who's making these donations? I mean, we know of the, Tom Cruises and John Travolta's. Like, what other, I mean, I guess they're not public figures, but
Nancy Cartwright has reached 21 million.
That's so disappointing because I'm such a Simpsons fan.
Yeah. Hollywood, I'm telling you.
Grant Cardone. Grant Cardone has, is it 10 or 20? He's up there. He came on. I mean, he's been a big Scientologist for a long time, but his donations have increased a lot in recent years. The biggest donor that they have is this woman named Trish Duggan. She and her husband, Bob, they split up a few years ago, and you don't see Bob so much, but I think they're both still giving. But they have said that between the two of them, they have given about $333 million to the Church of Scientology. Just that couple.
That brings up a good point, though. So your 12-year-olds, right? They're probably getting raised in it, right? And Hyde, the douchebags here,
Danny Masterson,
yes, and his brother, they're raised in it, right?
Yeah.
like, what's the family aspect of it, right? Because you just said it's so individualized. And like for the churches, you say, hey, come here, you're part of the community. We will raise you to do these things. And that, like, is there a baptism? Could I be an OT
It's a
something
great
at
question.
15?
They're kind of schizophrenic about that. Actually, Hubbard did say that he was going to go to OT 15 eventually, but it's only OT 8 now is the top one.
Okay, good to know.
Miscavige says he's going to come out with OT 9 and 10, but he never does. It's an interesting question you ask about family because, yes, there are tight families in Scientology. There's some, clans. There's some real important families.
Yeah.
Definitely the Masterson family was part of this larger group involving the Rabicis.
Like Giovanni Ribisi?
Yeah, Giovanni Ribisi and his twin sister,
wow.
their parents. There's various sort of powerful families in Scientology where everybody's a Scientologist, multiple generations. But what's kind of crazy about that is Hubbard's theory of the Thetan is that not only is this just a temporary vessel you're walking around in, but once this body dies, the Thetan then gets whisked off to Mars or Venus and eventually makes their way back and then goes down to maternity ward and jumps into a baby. And that's how you start your next lifetime. Well, if that's the case, there's no biological tie between you and your parents. Right. They just happen to be the people whose baby you jumped into, right?
Right.
And so there's this really weird thing in Scientology where there are some tight families, but essentially Scientology's basic philosophy completely undercuts the family because there is no real connection.
Right.
That person may be your father in this lifetime, but you may have been his father 5 or 6 lifetimes ago.
Right.
There's no like legacy members.
Right.
But like I said, they do have tight families. They do raise people. People do get raised in Scientology. But that's why I'm saying it's kind of schizophrenic, because on the one hand, they do like these clans that bring in the next generation. That's great.
Yeah.
But they also have this thing where it's like, okay, but it's just all a fiction.
Yeah, that's just a construct that you happen to be here with this. You're really just on your own path doing whatever your own thing is to do.
And that's why people will ask me, how can a parent drop off a 10-year-old at the cadet org and then just, be completely out of their lives? And they will tell you that because it's
not really their kid.
That looks like a 10-year-old, but that's a 76 trillion-year-old Thetan that's been a grown-up many times before and can fend for themselves.
Right.
Obviously.
They know how to figure it out. Jeez. It does seem weird though, because like part of, I think part of the big sell for religion too is, this idea of being together. What religion doesn't have some aspect of when I die, I will be reunited with people that I love or the people that I miss, the people that went ahead of me. Whereas in this scenario, it's like when you die, you're going to, shed that and move on to the next thing.
Well, but I do have to hand them. If there's one thing in Scientology where I feel like they might actually have something going on, the funeral, because they do think of that as like, this is okay. It's very sad that our friend has died, but no, his Thetan's coming back. We're going to see him later on. And so they tend to have kind of a positive attitude about the funeral. And that part I kind of respect that they're doing that. It's like, It seems kind of healthy to me. It's like, okay, let's celebrate their life. We're sad, but hey, they're coming back.
They transitioned into the next thing.
Exactly.
And that's that. And it's not this, soul crushing moment. I can see that. Okay. There's comfort there, I would say.
One little thing with all the terrible other things.
Right.
Are they encouraged to be donors?
The kids.
Well, yeah. I mean, I remember writing about...
I mean like organ donors.
Oh God.
Oh.
Organ donors, jeez.
I mean, because they look at it like, they're not using these bodies. The body's not important.
Right.
Yeah, they are. They do feel that way. That's a good, I'll have to ask. I don't think I've ever asked that question. If you're encouraged to be an organ donor.
It is weird, right? Because what's the point, right?
Yeah.
You're like, you can take these organs, but you're just going to add them to your crappy shell and
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever.
These organs are only OT2. I mean, good luck with them.
Yeah, exactly.
Was there like, can I level up?
I'll give you my liver, but it's got tons of body Thetans stuck to it.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want these. You don't want these Thetans. Could you imagine that, them trying to like save somebody's life and they're like, well, what level are they? Like, I can't, I worked so hard to get here. I can't set myself back. I just can't do it.
That's funny.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
But actually that's really like, so where do they fall in that? Like medicine and all that stuff. They're good with like normal medicinal things.
No.
Hubbard, well, two things. First of all, I mean, Hubbard was a World War II vet. He was a Navy lieutenant in the war, had a disastrous World War II, screwed up every command they gave him. He was hospitalized at the end of the war, but not because he was ever in battle. He was hospitalized for bursitis and pink eye, and I think he had a case of gonorrhea or something.
I was just about to say that. I feel like I was painting a picture.
But he would tell people that he was literally machine gunned in Java. I mean, just crazy stuff. But by 1947, he was so unhappy. He wrote a letter to the VA begging for mental health care, and apparently never got it. And by 1950, only 3 years later, he's coming out with this book saying he's the first person to ever just figure out how the human mind works.
Right.
So 3 years from begging for mental health care. So when he came out with Dianetics, one of the first thing he did was he tried to get some psychiatrists on board. Don't you understand? I've really discovered how the human mind works. And they looked at it and like, this is garbage, right? And he was so angry. So between not getting the care he wanted and being turned down by the evil psychs, he just really had it in for the psychiatrist.
I was just about to say that like hardens your that's a great, your own personal journey, and then hardened by the rejection from the people that you're looking to or seeking approval from.
So between that and he always had kind of a distrust of doctors in general. He would talk about, look, somebody's really sick, take them to the doctor, get them checked out, then audit them. He was particularly, I'm just reading some stuff he wrote in like 1970. He was starting to realize that people were just like, don't go to the doctor, we'll audit everything. He's like, nah, we don't want to get in trouble. But he did instill in Scientologists a real distrust of Western medicine. Sure. So today, no, there's no prohibition against going to the doctor and getting medicine. There is a prohibition in Scientology against psychiatric care or psychiatric medicine. Absolutely no.
Wow.
But if you break your arm, you get, you get the flu, go to the doctor. It's fine. You get cancer, they will not tell you that you can't go to the hospital and get treatment. However, Scientologists, because of his legacy, tend to look for alternative treatments because they just don't trust doctors in general. But it's not like, see, people get confused between Scientology and Christian Science. Christian Science, where there's really a hardcore ban against medicine. Scientology doesn't, there's no ban against it. But again, Scientologists tend to be distrustful of doctors and they tend to look for alternative treatments, but there's no prohibition against medicine, just prohibition against psychiatric medicine.
Right. It's probably more of a correlation of who they were prior to being in the Church of Scientology, that they would lean that way in the first place.
Yeah. So a narcissist who says he has all the answers, that tells you not to trust the media, not to trust modern medicine,
science.
I mean, can you imagine if there was a public figure like that out there today?
Right. Coming out telling people that science doesn't know what science is talking about.
Right.
Well, I tell people, and there's no question that Scientologists tend to lean right politically because people think, well, again, California, Florida, cult, they're probably a bunch of lefty hippies. No.
Yeah.
They tend to vote Republican, but they tend to be like Alex Jones style conspiracy conservatives.
Sure.
Right. They really believe all those same kind of QAnon things that you see. There are a lot of overlap. All of the QAnon stuff that I see in my feed tends to come from the Scientologists and ex-Scientologists that I keep an eye on. They're very much into those kind of conspiracies.
Correlation,
because look, they've bought into one of the biggest conspiracies of all time, right? So.
Right. Yeah. And for a penny and for a pound, just open them all up. Why not?
Right. Yeah, I read something about that a while ago that was like talking about cults. It was, the initial lure to bring someone in. Like I said before, there is that barrier to get over. But once you've crossed that barrier and accepted the first piece of whatever it is, like they can throw anything they want at you. So I guess, that tends to multiply and ends up with Thetans and Xenu on another planet and volcanoes and stuff.
Right. And they don't hit it with, you're exactly right. They don't hit you with that at first. You don't learn about Xenu until you're years into it. You've sunk tons of money into it. They, and that's why they don't want people to say anything. The celebrities are literally trained. When you get asked about Scientology, all you say is, it really helped me in my life. You should read a book and find out for yourself. You can go back to all these interviews with John Travolta and Tom Cruise and Kirstie Alley. They all say that so robotically. Oh, it was a really great thing in my life. You should get a book and read about it. Yeah. Because they've been told, listen, you're not going to start talking about auditing your body Thetans to a reporter. Forget it. You're not going to do that.
Right.
But they all do. That's what they do. They all go, they're OT, they're up in the OT levels themselves. That's what they've done.
Do you think there's a weird thing of that, like connecting with celebrities too? I mean, they're people too. I mean, I guess whatever. I'm just saying, like Tom Cruise comes into audit, and you're like, you're Tom Cruise. Like, I'd still be a little starstruck, right?
Sure.
I mean,
don't
that's got to
know.
carry a lot of weight, you know?
I mean, as an OT7, I would be like, well, looking down on him, of course, but you know.
No, you'd be looking up. You'd be looking up.
Oh,
He's
looking up at him. Is he
yeah.
8? I didn't
Yeah.
know that. Could he crush planets yet? I don't even know. He does do some amazing stunts, so maybe that's part of it. Maybe he's like, I can hang from planes now. That's what I've learned.
True. Yeah, definitely. Is that part of the lore? I mean, it seems like they make that part pretty public, like the celebrity centers and, you know, the few amounts of celebrities that come in there. I mean, do people come in thinking I have access to Hollywood and these opportunities now?
In 1955, L. Ron Hubbard literally came out with something he called Project Celebrity.
Very on the nose.
I was just going to say, he's a writer. He's a science fiction writer. And that was what he came up with. We're going to call it, it's real hush, Project Celebrity, if anybody asks.
Yeah, he knew that, you know, if you attract some of these big names in, it would make everything look a little more normal. And so he had a whole list of people like Danny Kaye and Walt Disney, and he never got any of those, but they did start, you know, it took them a while, but they got some.
Courting people.
And 75, they got Travolta. 79, they got Kirstie Alley. 86, they got Tom Cruise. Yeah, it's a very important part of what they try to do. You know, they've lost quite a few in recent years. Kelly Preston passed away, Kirstie Alley, Chick Corea, Laura Prepon announced that she was out. Beck Hansen announced that he was out. Of course, Leah Remini, news about leaving and talking about it.
Yeah.
So, and then the pandemic kind of shut things down for a while. So when Miscavige was getting things going again, I was kind of curious, like, okay, so which celebrities are going to kind of answer the call? And it turns out that they have 4 big dates on their calendar: New Year's event, L. Ron Hubbard's birthday in March. They celebrate their ship in the summer, and then they have this big IAS gala in the fall in England. And this last 6 months or so, Miscavige restored all those to their original places after the pandemic shut things down. And at the L. Ron Hubbard birthday event in Florida in March, in the front row was John Travolta, which, you know, you kind of expect, but next to him was Elizabeth Moss. And I have never seen her at one of these events before.
Really? I forgot that she was in there.
I think she's stepping up her involvement. I think they're grooming her right now the way they were with Cruise 20 years ago to get her more involved. But, I mean, very pregnant, standing next to Travolta, giving David Miscavige a standing ovation at the L. Ron Hubbard birthday event. That's big.
Yeah.
She's such a great actress too. So can they help further careers? Or, I mean, I don't understand what's in it for someone like her.
Right. That's a great question. And there's no question that 20 years ago, Scientology did have a lot of influence in Hollywood. And, you know, some people did consider that a good option for their career, was get involved with Scientology. That'll give you the connections. I think they have less influence today, but some actors I've talked to have talked about how the kind of training routines you go through and the sort of confidence building that they try to instill in people can be good. But again, I want to point out they have a few. The vast majority of people in Hollywood have nothing to do with Scientology, but they do have a few people. And, you know, I think John Travolta would say without question, he assigns almost all of his success to L. Ron Hubbard. Not so much David Miscavige, the leader now, but Travolta really reveres Hubbard.
Where's the biggest hub then, if it's not, you know, the public part that we see, the celebrities in Hollywood?
That's a good question, because I think it's been changing. I mean, Los Angeles has traditionally been Scientology's really biggest place. And then they had this secret management compound about 90 miles east of LA. But basically that Southern California has traditionally been the main thing. I think that's changed over the last 15 years. I think gradually the center of Scientology's gravity has shifted to Clearwater, Florida, where they have what they call the Flag Land Base. Okay. And I think David Miscavige spends much more time there now. He's encouraged a lot of LA Scientologists to move there, including celebrities. So I think Clearwater is becoming more the sort of center of the Scientology universe. It's really hurting around the world in a lot of places. A few places, though, it seems like they're doing better. Mexico, Taiwan, some Eastern Europe places.
Do you think it's a political environment in Florida is a little bit more welcoming, per se?
I think that's important to Miscavige. I think he probably thinks that the Florida state government is less interested in getting involved than the California government would. But the California government's been pretty compliant for a long time, too. I think that one big reason is that the Flag land base in Clearwater, Florida is their financial engine. If you're taking these various courses, going through the grades, going clear the lower OT levels, you can do those pretty much anywhere, whether you're a Scientologist in Sweden or a Scientologist in Japan. You can go down to your local, what's called org, and do a lot of that. But once you get up to a certain level, you have to go to Clearwater, Florida to get these most expensive, most arcane things. So the Flag land base has these Scientologists flying in from all over the world to spend incredible amounts of money. The Flag land base makes more money than all the other Scientology orgs combined. They take in about $2 million a week there.
Holy shit.
So to me, it makes sense that if Miscavige is going to kind of circle the wagons and sort of get into kind of a fortress mentality, it would be there.
That's where you want to be. So why doesn't the government step in? Like, you know, we know all these things, like we see all this stuff. It's like, where, and what would be the angle? I would guess the money thing would be an easy angle to get in on, but intimidation, that's sort of very soft kind of stuff, probably.
Yeah, that's what ex-Scientologists are always asking themselves. Why isn't the government stepping in?
Yeah, it seems like an organization. I don't see any religious aspects to everything that you've described so far. It's more like a self-help program.
Yeah, but that's so squishy. It's so squishy. It's hard.
Yeah, it's a gray area of like, what do you believe? You know what I mean? You believe you were this thing before.
I guess.
It's like a gray area. But it doesn't seem to me like it's not a politically connected organization or feeling that way per se. Where are their protections?
They have a national affairs office in DC. They try to influence some things politically. They know they're not very popular, so their effect on politicians has been somewhat limited. There have been some politicians in the past that have kind of gone to bat for them, but these days it's tough. But they do try to influence things on certain levels. In the late, like 2005 to 2009, there were some key defections of some high-level executives that once they got together and really wanted something to happen. And the FBI happened to be investigating at that time. And so they got hooked up with that investigation. By October 2000, was it 9 or 10? I'm forgetting now. The FBI was very close to raiding that international base east of Los Angeles, to the point where Mark Headley, for example, was one of these people that had escaped during that period. And he told me that the FBI agents that were working on this plan were so close to raiding the base that year that they recorded the tail numbers on Tom Cruise's planes at his private hangar in Burbank in case David Miscavige tried to run that way.
Oh, wow.
Another ex-Scientologist, Matt Pesch, told me that he was personally asked by the FBI agents, when we go in there, will you ride in the van with us? Because they're going to need somebody to point out, who's what. And Matt Pesch said, I'm ready. And that's how close they came to raiding the base that October. And then it kind of fell apart. And that investigation was based on the way those Sea Org members were being treated.
Yeah.
That they were, and I did get a copy of the investigation. You can read.
I mean, they're essentially slaves, right?
Yeah, they were separated from their families and they were paid nothing, and they were kept away from they were basically slaves.
Right.
And so that was the idea but the big risk the FBI has, by that point they had this thing called the Hole, where there were these top executives that were literally in kind of a prison on the base. The problem they face is they could go in there with the vans, they could throw open those doors and say, hey, you're free. And the people might say, free, I'm fine where I am. That's the big risk you face.
Sure. But it's any cult, right? And that most of any cult you go in there, obviously, or they burn it down. I guess that would be the worst possible thing.
I don't know that there's going to be an FBI investigation based on Sea Org treatment. I did talk to some feds a few years later that said they were interested in financial crimes.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, there's got to be some of that stuff, like misappropriation of funds and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's not all donations. They're selling a product, essentially, all the way up, and that can't be tax exempt.
It's a church with a literal price list.
Yes, right. And what philanthropy are they involved in,
Yeah, they have these front groups that they've operated since the early 70s. Drug treatment, advocacy against drugs, literacy in schools, and
can't read Dianetics if you can't read.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they hand out these pamphlets with L. Ron Hubbard's wonderful advice. So they are always citing that, like, we're doing such good in the community, and it's just.
So maybe it's a sort of a like dirtbaggy organizational thing that's like you're choosing your path into it. And as a government, they're like, I don't know what to tell you, dude. Look where you're spending your money, dude. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like,
I know. I think you're right, Ken. I think part of the problem is it's like, well, these people joined, they signed up.
Right. Willingly.
And that makes it tough. I think another thing that makes it tough is how small it is. If you're a politician and you want votes, we're going to take down an organization with how many people? 20,000 people? True. I think that's a problem.
And I like that Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
He seems nice.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I want another Mission Impossible.
Yeah, seriously.
And it can take a long time for somebody coming out to kind of figure out what they want to do. And then they finally come forward 10 years later and say, I was victimized. And you're like, yeah, well, it's been too long. I mean, law enforcement needs stuff that's fresh. So that's been a problem.
I have a question on the machine, the clearing machine that's behind you, by the way, for those
e-meter,
both of our listeners.
Did you want a reading?
Yes, exactly. Like, it looks like it's from a 1950s radio kind of thing with a weird meter thing.
Yeah.
So scientifically speaking, not Scientologically speaking, that's pretty good. I got that out.
Yeah.
What is it actually doing? So you said it's skin galvanization, but what's it really doing?
Okay, so say a polygraph machine, right? The lie detector that we know has 4 inputs. All right. The technician wants to check your respiration, your blood pressure, your heart rate, and your skin galvanism. So they put probes on you in various ways so that this machine can monitor those 4 things. Then the polygraph examiner asks you questions. The machine cannot tell if you're lying. All the machine does is measure how your body reacts to questions. So that when, you're at the first thing they ask you is what's your name? Because they want to get a baseline of how your body reacts. Oh, and then what happened to that money? Boom, right? Yeah. So then the polygraph examiner can say, at this point, he reacted to that question. You still can't say. This is why courts won't accept it.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's even become junk science.
The machine literally does not say they were lying. It just says their body reacted when they were asked this question. Okay, the e-meter is only one of those 4. It's just the skin galvanism. And even worse, the way that you interact with it is they ask you to hold these sensors that look like tin cans.
Okay.
And the problem with that is, if you know anything about science, one of the things you try to do is isolate the thing you're trying to measure. You can't isolate it here because there's the grip, there's whether your hands are sweaty or not.
Sure.
There's all these things that might be influencing that device and the skin galvanism. So it's absolute garbage as a signal.
Wow.
And yet they're not even saying, well, you reacted when we said. No, they believe that thing can read your mind.
Right. It knows your subconscious and is like you're tapping into something that you can't even.
And once you believe that, it's such a powerful idea. So it does become an incredible interrogation tool, because once a person accepts, I can't hide anything from that machine, then people spill their guts. Right. So it is a very, very powerful tool, but only because people have convinced themselves that it does things that it doesn't do.
Do they build like a dossier on you too? If you're like, because you're probably telling them all the terrible things you've done in your life, right? Do they then hold on to that and be like, well, if you want
absolutely, because they're telling you're not going to get better until you admit to all the terrible things you've done in your life, and then they write them down.
Probably making up terrible things too. You're probably like, yeah, sure, and then I don't know, I hit the kid with a baseball bat, because it was silver, just to see the meter go too. You're like, I'm so frazzled now. And then what do they do with that though?
So they're notorious for this. Is that from the time you're a kid in Scientology or whenever you join, every session, and again, remember, this was all built in the 50s and 60s. So it's very pre-computer mentality. They do have computerized things, but it's essential that when you are being audited, your auditor is writing down notes about everything you're saying. And then they build these gigantic paper files on people, huge stacks of, files on each person. So a famous one was Laura DiCrescenzo. She was in the Sea Org. And one of the things they do to women in the Sea Org is, they work around the clock. They work 112 hours a week. They stay in dorms. It's just everything's an emergency. Everything's gonna be worked. So you can't raise a child in that.
No, but it's only for 1 billion years. So
That's
Right.
true. Good point.
So they coerce women to have abortions, and they have for decades.
Oh, God.
And so when Laura DiCrescenzo came out in 2009, she filed a lawsuit saying that she'd been abused in the Sea Org, including being forced to have an abortion she didn't want to have.
Mm-hmm. How's that play with Republicans?
So that lawsuit took years and years. And at one point, what she wanted were her files, because she and her attorneys figured all this stuff we're talking about, they wrote it down. They record everything.
Mm-hmm.
The judge decided, yes, she is entitled to her files. Scientology fought that court order all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Wow.
And they had this attorney named Bert Deichsler, and he would write in these things that the reason why the church shouldn't turn them over is because they have religious material in them. He kept talking about how religious this stuff was, and it would even be bad for her to reveal her religious, activities.
Right.
And I remember thinking, man, he's laying this on really thick. Well, They finally lost all those appeals, and they had to turn over her files.
Oh, wow.
And of course, she shared them with me. What's in them? Religious. It's notes about how she was talking about how much she missed her mom. And then they punished her for missing her mom when she was 13. And then, of course, there was notes in there when she was 17 and she had her abortion. It was disgusting material. It was so disgusting. They're writing down everything she's confessing to. And I to this day, I wish that attorney would be punished for lying to the highest courts in this land and saying that this was religious material. It was not. It was notes on how a teenager was being abused by this organization.
That is terrible. So now, see, there you got something.
That's horrendous.
That's something the government should be involved in.
Yeah, right.
That's your angle in, or at least an angle in, for how to sort of hold people accountable for that.
I'm surprised they didn't, lose her information over time, so to say.
That's a very good point. I feel like that is a fetish they have, is writing everything down and recording everything and having it. And it's a little bit of an Achilles heel for them, because you would think they would just go out and shred everything, but they don't.
Right.
They hold on to it.
Our lawyers are better than your lawyers, and we have more money, and our war chest is bigger. Who's the next person going to try? Because we'll learn from whatever mistake we made there, and just put up more of a wall. So
I always say, I think the U.S. courts are not set up for an organization that deals in nothing but bad faith, and they keep winning cases because they just lie flat out to these courts that are not set up to deal with that.
Right.
It's unbelievable. I do want to wrap this up kind of soon. I do have one quick question though. There's a lot of rumors about David Miscavige's
There you go.
Wife
Shelley. Yes, thank you. You knew where I was going with that. How much of that's actually true?
Oh yeah, I've been writing about that for 12 years now. Shelley was also a messenger with Dave when they were Commodore's Messengers organization back in the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And so they got married very young. And then when Hubbard died in 86 and Miscavige pushed Pat Broker out of the way, they ruled Scientology as a couple. He took on the title COB for chairman of the board.
Mm-hmm.
And Shelley's literal title was COB assistant. And they lived at that secret base east of Los Angeles. And then in the early 2000s, things started to change. And Dave started really getting obsessed with Tom Cruise and doing more Hollywood type things. And that made Shelley uncomfortable. And in the summer of 2005, Miscavige had gone to Los Angeles from that base near Hemet to work on this book project. And the people that worked there at the time told me it was unusual. Just that was unusual, because usually Dave and Shelley went everywhere together, Europe, Asia, whatever. They were always together.
Mm-hmm.
But summer 2005, Dave went to LA to work on this thing, and she stayed back at the base. That was weird.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mike Rinder had been working in LA on that project. He went out to the base, and he said Shelley cornered him. And she cornered him in an interesting place on a particular balcony on a particular building. And he said, I knew what she was doing, because she knew that was maybe the only place that didn't have a camera on it.
Yep.
She knew that she could have a private conversation with him there. And then she asked him a really unusual question. Dave and Shelley had this set of wedding rings where they had like multiple, like gold, white gold, and, like the different versions of these rings.
Mm-hmm.
And Shelley asked Mike, hey, you were just in LA with Dave. Which of his wedding rings was he wearing? And Mike thought it was really unusual. And he told me, I immediately realized what she was really asking me was, is he wearing his wedding?
Any ring.
Oh,
Yes. Yes. And that's when Mike told me, that's when I knew she was in trouble. Something was going on. The other thing that happened that summer was that Dave drove everyone crazy at the base because he could never make a decision. So there was this thing they call an org board, which defined which jobs people had, and they could never get it filled out to his satisfaction. While he was in LA, she filled it in. She said, here, you're going to work here. You're going to work here. Signed up, done. Everyone was happy.
Okay.
The other thing she did was they wanted to renovate the building that they lived in. And so she had these workers crate up all of Dave's stuff. So at some point in like late August, early September, Dave returned to the base, saw that she had filled in the org board without his permission, saw all of his stuff sitting in crates outside where they lived, and absolutely blew his top. I have multiple witnesses to this who were there. Just had the mother of all temper tantrums. A week later, Shelley Miscavige disappeared, and she has not been seen in the 19 years since.
really?
I didn't know that.
Now I know where he sent her. There's a smaller compound up in the mountains near Lake Arrowhead, California, with the most secret of all Scientology subsidiaries called Church of Spiritual Technology. That's the weird group that creates and runs these vaults, underground vaults where they keep L. Ron Hubbard's materials to survive a civilization collapse.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
And the headquarters of that is this little compound up in the mountains. And I believe that's where they've kept her for the last 19 years. Now, there's some evidence she was also at one of CST's bases in farther northern California a few years ago, but I still think that they're keeping her at the headquarters CST. And
But there literally has not been a sighting?
there's been some sightings. Not too long after she disappeared in 2005, a man named Mitch Brisker said he saw her in 2008, and she was with these women that are her handlers. At a Starbucks. At that time, she was able to come down the mountain every once in a while. I also talked to a woman in 2015 and 16 saw a woman in town up there by that compound that she believed was Shelley Miscavige, but that's it. I mean, anytime Scientology is really, put to it, they always say, oh, she's on a special project. She doesn't want to make a public statement. But John Brousseau, who was David Miscavige's brother-in-law and worked very closely with Tom Cruise, told Leah Remini on her show, Dave will keep Shelley where she is until she dies.
Holy smokes.
As you'll be under his thumb and where she belongs. Still holds the same title?
I mean, I don't know that she's called COB assistant anymore.
All right. That'd be an indicator.
Yeah, she's knocked back down to, level 1.
Yeah. Seriously.
And she's forced to watch Battlefield Earth every day.
She may be resigned to her fate because they're letting her work on the L. Ron Hubbard archive project. She may be resigned to her fate.
Did you tell her? Did you reach out and say you have some archive experience with the Village Voice, and that you'd be happy to help her kind of give her some tips, some things like that, some do's, some don'ts?
Dude, you were the only person that made that connection. That is awesome.
That'd be really good. And you never know. Maybe they would tell you the secret location then if you come with that olive branch.
Oh, I've been up there. There. They wouldn't answer the door when I came, but
wow. I just want to keep asking more and more questions about this, but I don't want to hold you all day. Ken, do you have anything else?
Just what's next? Where are you headed next?
Well, yeah, there's numerous lawsuits. Leah Remini is now suing the Church of Scientology. That's a very interesting lawsuit. I did break the news that Danny Masterson was being investigated by the LAPD in 2017.
Yeah.
So the last few years, I've been really busy following that whole case. I was at both of his trials every day.
Good for you.
Oh, really?
And I broke the news that Leah Remini had left Scientology too. So, I'm really interested in Leah's lawsuit, the lawsuit by Danny Masterson's victims. There's some other legal things going on, but the question is always the one you ask: where's the government? When is the government going to step in and do something? We really don't know.
Yeah.
So I like to have a seat in the front row and just report what's going on.
All right. So now Aaron's going to ask you the out of left field question.
It's going to be really out of left field because usually we talk more about a person than a topic, but this topic is just so fascinating to me
Oh my God, it's ridiculous.
Could go on all day. So the question that we end with is usually wanting to hear a little about where someone came from. So if we were to come visit, where would you call home, first of all?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I've been in New York now for
Or I guess, you know, which planet and which lifetime would you call home?
17 years. Yeah, I haven't figured out those past lives yet.
Yeah, gotcha.
I do
You'll get
feel
there.
at home in LA. My mom is still there. I go out to visit her. I have very good friends there. But, you know,
Okay.
I've been here 17 years now, and I really, really like New York. I don't know. That's a good question. Which one do I really consider home at this point?
Well, let's take New York.
Okay.
We come to visit. We're going to spend an afternoon into the evening. Take us on a tour of
Like-
New York. But,
like
you know,
The
your
Tony
tour.
Ortega, yes, the
Yes.
experience in New York.
Oh man, so much has changed though. That's the thing. I mean, a lot of the places I used to like to go to don't exist anymore.
First of
Yeah.
all, which borough are you hanging out in? And then which neighborhood?
I know I'm supposed to say Brooklyn, and I'm a hip
I do
cat,
like
but
Brooklyn.
I'm a Manhattan guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I look, I'm a big cyclist. That's a thing.
Oh, yeah?
If you truly wanted the Tony Ortega experience, you'd get on your bikes with me.
Then we both have bikes.
I would cycle. I'd
Yep.
take you down through Central Park. We'd go down to the Battery. We'd go across the Brooklyn Bridge. I mean, I just love cycling in New York and going to various places. I end up usually up by Columbia, where I was briefly a student.
Right.
I got a favorite pizza slice joint there.
What's it
Stop
called?
and Slice.
What's it called? What's it called?
Pizza on 110th and Broadway, I think, something like that. And
I'm sorry, I think I talked over the name. What's the name of it?
Coronet. You
Coronet.
get a jumbo slice there. I love stopping there for a slice on my bike rides.
Okay. How far do you usually bike?
Well, I just recently turned 61, and on my birthday, I traditionally do a long ride. I went down through Central Park to the Battery to Brooklyn, ended up over in New Jersey. It was a total ride of 104 miles.
Jesus.
Okay. I've done they have this thing called the Seagull Century on the
Mhm.
Eastern Shore every year. And my wife and I have done it a few times. It's a 100-mile bike ride, and it is so boring. It's like, you know, at hour 5 and 6, you're like, oh my God, like I'm sore.
We're gonna bring you to Delmarva here in
Yeah.
the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and it's
Right.
lovely, lovely flatlands. It's just rolling.
Probably a lot more to
farmlands.
see on the New York
Hell
version
yeah.
of that.
Well, I'm hoping my big tour in the summer, I like to do multi-day tours, and
Yeah.
I'm really hoping this year to ride to Gettysburg. I've never
Oh,
been
nice.
there.
Okay.
I want to spend a couple days getting down there and then touring the battlefield and everything. That's my hope this year. I don't know if I'm going to get to do it because this year things are kind of crazy, but
Yeah.
I like to plan out tours like that.
Very cool.
Okay. I like that answer. I would love biking around the city. And then, of course, getting a really good slice of pizza.
Yeah.
There you go.
Is there anything else that is like an absolute, you know, must on your list?
Got to go to this restaurant or hit this place, this spot.
Mm-hmm.
God,
Any
my
churches
favorite
along the way?
restaurants have all closed down, man. It's terrible.
What about so where do you get a cocktail? Where do you go out for a night? You're like, we're going out for the night. Where are we going to get the drink?
Well, I used to love this place called the Scratcher right across from the Village Voice, but it's been quite a while, so I don't even know if it's still there. But that's where I would love to take you guys.
It's a real dive.
It's only like a block from McSorley's, but I don't go to McSorley's. I go to Scratcher.
McSorley's is like the famous dive. Is this kind of like along the same lines though?
No, it's classier than that.
Okay. I feel like anything could be classier than that.
It's not trying that hard. Very cool.
All right. I like it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this was fun. You guys asked great questions.
Oh, we appreciate it. You know, keep up the good work.
Yeah.
I'll keep reading your articles as they come out. And, you know, if anything big comes up, we'd love to talk to you again.
All right, on.
And if
I'd
you-
love to come back.
You hear
Okay,
of
cool.
anything in Baltimore, you let it give us the advance
Hey,
notice and be like, hey,
I like Baltimore. It's been a while since I've been there. I love the
it's coming back. We're coming up. Very
Tony, this has
cool.
been really great meeting you. Thank you
Yeah.
again. Have a great weekend.
All
Take
right,
care.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Good luck.